The Galactic Council chamber hung in orbit over a pale blue sun like a spire of divine arrogance, obsidian curves laced with pulsing veins of gold light, thrumming with the entitlement of 1,000 empires. Each delegate sat in their allotted crescent, arranged like concentric predators encircling prey. Feathers, scales, chitin, robes, mechanical shells, every form of sapience clothed in their own variation of authority, all converging for the 38th session on human evaluation. At the edge of the lowest tier, seated precisely where one would place a non-entity, sat General Ara Voss. Clad in charcoal gray Terran formalwear so nondescript it seemed an afterthought, she sipped quietly from a battered steel thermos with one gloved hand resting still on her lap. She had not spoken, not once, in any session to date. The silence had become a statement more thunderous than any speech, yet the council still laughed at her. Ambassador Krothak of the Carwell Dominion, an armored brute whose crest alone had subjugated 5 systems in ceremonial combat, snorted as he stood. "Shall we again tolerate the mute human's theater of irrelevance?" His voice echoed, pompous and sharp. "Perhaps her thermos will declare war on our behalf this time." Polite laughter rippled from some quarters, while others, more observant, shifted uneasily. Drellin of the Ver Assembly raised a tendril, as always trying to bridge reason, but even he could not deny the growing discomfort that had settled over the chamber like an invisible net. 3 weeks ago, the Mindseer FKL had attempted a deep probe of Voss's consciousness. The creature now floated in a neurological stasis tank on his homeworld, convulsing silently in endless cognitive dissonance. Since then, no one had dared try again. Krothak strode forward. "Protocol 17 is back on the docket. Earth has sat in this chamber too long, offering nothing, contributing less. I propose a motion of strategic containment. Preventative. Surgical." Ara Voss finally looked up, not at Krothak, through him. Her gaze was level, unblinking. She spoke 5 words, calm and unhurried. "Try that. See what happens." The room paused. It wasn't what she said, it was how, as if she weren't speaking to them at all, but narrating a foregone conclusion. A delegate from the Suldari Combine whispered nervously to her aide, recalling how a Terran supply drone had once crashed on a Suldari moon, and within an hour recompiled itself into a fully cloaked observation outpost. No one had ever explained how. No one had asked again. Krothak scoffed, but not convincingly. "Your silence is not power, General. It is cowardice." Ara gave him a small, precise smile. No warmth. "Spicy snacks," she said, holding up her thermos. "Careful. They're intense." Laughter again, though thinner now, uncertain. Voss returned to her seat, and silence resumed, except it wasn't quite silence anymore. Something was humming, a low frequency, perhaps psychological, a dread that grew not from noise but from the absence of it. Minutes later, on the edge of council space, the Carwellian war frigate Gorak's Spine activated weapons protocols to demonstrate containment enforcement. Before its targeting system could lock, the ship's entire crew simultaneously collapsed, clutching their skulls, as if crushed by something that wasn't there. No visible weapon, no heat signature. Just silence. Broadcast back into the HE. Chamber in real time. One moment a crew of 160. The next, a ship of whispers and blank stares. Ara Voss didn't so much as twitch. Krothak's voice caught in his throat. From behind the curtains of civility, the fabric of galactic supremacy had begun to fray. Humanity had not fired, had not moved. Yet everyone in that chamber now felt the edges of a realization creeping in like frostbite. Earth had not come to play. It had come prepared. As Ara gently closed her thermos and placed it on the table, the gesture felt like a closing book, a sealed fate. The council remained frozen as she spoke once more, voice soft, deadly clear. "We asked for nothing. You gave us theater, So we wrote a better ending. And then she resumed her silence, letting the weight of unfinished sentences hang like executioner's blades over the chamber's ornate grandeur. Krothak did not return to his seat. He stood rigid, his pride a crumbling monument held together by habit and fear, staring at the hollow feed still displaying the Gorak's spine, lifeless, drifting and echoing with silence that sounded more like a scream. No visible trauma, no enemy. Vessel. Just 160 trained soldiers erased from operational function by what the human had not done. The chamber buzzed with whispers, nervous clicks, pheromone bursts, and pulse shifts as different species processed dread in different ways. The Sultari began reciting neural psalms. The Drex delegation blinked asynchronously in what was technically panic. Only Ara Voss remained still, her expression unreadable. Drelin of the Ver Assembly rose again, his voice quieter this time, like someone trying not to disturb a predator. We should perhaps reconsider immediate containment. Earth has not— No! Krothak barked, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. This is exactly what they want, to infest us with hesitation, to trick us into fearing ghosts. Protocol 17 stands. We strike now. And the vote passed. Not unanimously, but enough. Within minutes, 28 ships of the Carwell, Dominion and the allied Truvian Pact began mobilizing under the emergency measure, citing Earth as an unregistered strategic threat. Ara Voss didn't object. She merely stood and nodded politely to the room, like a guest excusing herself before dessert. Understood, she said, and walked out. No entourage, no guards. Just the weight of inevitability trailing in her wake. Hours later, as the containment fleet closed in on Earth's orbital perimeter, nothing seemed out of place. No raised shields, no visible military mobilization. Earth's planetary signal traffic was full of memes, weather reports, sitcom reruns, and holiday sales. One Truvian commander even laughed, asking if this was some kind of collective madness. But then, the fleet's sensor feeds began to fragment, first into static, then into impossibilities. Vessels that weren't there. Moon fragments that shimmered in and out of detection. One cruiser reported an entire fleet of Terran dreadnoughts above Saturn. Another saw nothing but solar interference. And then they began to hear things. Not from outside, but inside their ships, inside their own heads. Automated systems began speaking in their captains' voices, not mimicry, perfect replication. A whispered commentary on their doubts, fears, regrets. One Carwell pilot who had questioned the morality of the strike heard her own voice repeating the question endlessly through her neural implants. Others saw crew members walking the halls who had died years ago. Earth hadn't built ships for this. It had built questions, built mirrors, built echoes. And as the alien crews tried to rally, they discovered their commands no longer executed in sequence. Something had hijacked their predictive logic cores, orders delayed by seconds, then minutes, then reversed. Ships bumped into each other like blind giants. A Truvian destroyer opened fire on its own carrier, swearing it saw a cloaked Terran vessel decloak, but no one else saw it. In the span of 11 minutes, 7 vessels self-disabled, 4 fired on allies, and 3 turned back entirely with no order given. No human ships had fired, no known weapons deployed. And still, the containment fleet was unraveling. In the eye. Galactic Council Chamber, Krothak received the live telemetry in silence. His ridged brow twitched, and for the first time, he looked genuinely old. "What are they doing?" he asked no one. Drelin offered a grim answer. "They're not fighting. Us. They're letting us realize we never mattered." A new broadcast flickered onto every screen in the chamber. Not Ara Voss, her thermos centered in frame, resting on a steel table. Steam rising gently. A human voice, genderless, unaccented, spoke softly. "Try again." Then the feed cut. Krothak turned toward the exit but froze as Ara re-entered the chamber, her expression unchanged, hands folded. "We've never spoken first," she said, voice calm as still water. "We prepare, we wait, and when provoked, we educate." Her eyes met his, not with hatred, but with something far worse, pity. "You believed your strength lay in action. Ours lies in outliving mistakes like yours." And with that, she sat again, silent. While above, the galactic order began to come apart at the seams, not with war, but with understanding far too late. The containment fleet never reached Earth. By the time they crossed Neptune's orbital shadow, only a scattered skeleton of ships remained functional, and even those had begun to turn against their own logic. Command hierarchies melted under the pressure of unresolvable contradictions. Sensor ghosts wove across space in choreographed misdirection, mimicking entire Terran battalions that did not exist, until alien commanders ordered countermeasures and realized too late that those orders were the triggers. Entire command bridges blinked offline, not through power loss, but philosophical failure. Neural AI cores were confronted with data loops so precise and recursive that they induced self-disruption, like staring into the abyss of unsolvable riddles. In the asteroid belts, the rocks began to move, not by thrust, but by reconfiguration. The belts had been a trap all along. Thousands of seemingly ordinary asteroids activated with swarm clouds, AI-infused micro-drones dormant for decades, seeded before humanity had even spoken to the stars. They didn't attack directly. They observed. They measured emotional stress patterns, pulse shifts, neurotransmitter spikes, and micro-decision biases in enemy crews. Then slowly, they spoke. In Carwellian, in Truvian, in Sildari clicks, in every native language of the invading fleet. They whispered short, personalized phrases into command decks through hijacked audio channels. Phrases like, "Why do you always hesitate before giving orders?" Or, "They don't follow you. They fear you." And worst of all, "Earth knew you would be here. You are already part of their plan." It wasn't an attack. It was a therapy. Session from hell. On Mars, the quiet moon Phobos unfolded. Literally. What had always been presumed a crater-pocked satellite was in truth a weapon, but not one of explosions or beams. It reconfigured itself into a signal amplifier, broadcasting Earth's strategic cognitive dissonance field across the system, triggering cascading mistrust in any system wired for command unity. Truvian ships began to fragment into micro-factions within their own hulls. Carwell officers accused each other of betrayal without evidence. Crews mutinied against captains they had followed for decades. Not a single shot had been fired by a human. But the alien coalition had already lost. It was Drellin who first voiced what the others feared to admit. "There is no Earth defense fleet. This is it. This is the defense." And he was correct. What Earth had built was not an arsenal. It was a philosophy weaponized. It had learned not from war, but from collapse, from centuries of internal, near destruction, from misinformation, tribal conflict, emotional manipulation, and existential dread. Earth had refined these failures into instruments sharper than any blade. Above Jupiter, a dozen Sildari war cruisers went dark, their crews caught in personal psychological loops tailored to each captain's deepest memory, the death of a sibling, a failed negotiation, the moment they realized they'd joined a doomed cause. Aravos, still seated in the council chamber, placed a small black cube on the speaking pedestal. "This contains the complete feed of what just transpired," she said, not looking at anyone in particular. "Every broadcast, every reaction, every failure point, you will study it, you will learn, or you will repeat." Krothak was silent, shoulders sunken like a collapsed monument, his voice finally stripped of its defiance. "Why didn't you just attack us?" Ara looked at him with something more intimate than contempt, disappointment. Because attack implies you were worth defeating. That line cracked the room. Not from volume, but from implication. No council member moved. Some pretended to process emergency messages. Others stared into nothing. In that silence, the Galactic Council, an institution that had brokered wars and rewritten laws across millennia, understood its own irrelevance. And still, Earth had made no demands, had claimed no territory, had offered no ultimatum. It simply waited, patient and terrible, like a chess master who had already checkmated their opponent and was giving them time to notice. One of the younger delegates, trembling, asked the question they all feared. What happens now? Aravos rose slowly, adjusted her thermos, and answered without turning. That depends. How well do you listen? The Galactic Council reconvened 6 days later, but the chamber no longer echoed with confidence. The obsidian walls seemed darker, the humming light duller, as if the architecture itself had lost faith in its purpose. Delegates arrived quieter, without their ceremonial escorts or dramatic entrances. Krothak did not speak. He sat far from the central platform, slouched under the weight of recognition, no longer the voice of dominance, but the echo of a collapsing order. Around him, empires that once dictated interstellar policy reviewed their own doctrines in nervous whispers, as if speaking too loudly might invite attention from the quiet predator they had mistaken for prey. Aravos entered alone as always, but this time no one mocked her silence. She carried no documents, no weapons, no entourage. Just the thermos, still warm, still unassuming, a relic that now haunted the nightmares of generals across 12 systems. She stepped up to the platform and waited. No gavel struck, no formal recognition was given, yet everyone leaned in. Her voice was steady, unforced. Earth did not come to conquer. We came to remember. We remember our own collapse, our century of smoke and blood and hollow pride. We were you once. A murmur passed through the chamber, the kind not of dissent, but of acknowledgement. What you mistook as silence was listening. What you mocked as stillness was study. And what you challenged, she said, pausing only slightly, was survival refined into art. She gestured to the floating data cube rotating beside her, now transmitting the compiled telemetry of Earth's defense, not with bravado, but with scholarly clarity. The footage showed entire fleets dismantled by suggestion, not fire. Officers broken not by injury, but implication. Empires unraveled by their own fear of being wrong. No weapons fired, no soldiers lost. Just understanding. Turned deadly. We will not ask for a seat on your council, Ara said. We already have one. You just didn't see it. That sentence sank like a slow knife. Drellin looked up, weary and blinking. What do you want from us? Ara considered the question. Nothing, she said finally. Respect is not requested. It's calibrated. She paused, then added, and earned in silence. Krothak struggled to his feet, voice hoarse with something unfamiliar. Humility. We underestimated you. All of us did. Ara turned to him with the gentleness of someone placing a flower on a grave. We built our civilization on that assumption. Underestimation was always our shield. We let it harden into something stronger. The chamber went utterly still. Even the ambient hum seemed to falter, like the very energy of the station had begun to take note. Across the galaxy, fleets were recalled, borders redrawn, doctrines rewritten. War colleges across the core systems suspended curricula and replaced them with Terran case studies. Earth was no longer considered a wild card or a threat. It was a constant, a new axis of power that had never declared itself, and yet reshaped. The balance of the stars without launching a single war. As Ara turned to leave, Drellin called out softly, "What should we tell our people? About you?" She paused. "Tell them, we were never the threat. We were the warning." And with that, she stepped into the corridor, vanishing into the geometry of the station like a shadow never meant to be seen. Behind her, the council remained frozen in a silence that, for the first time, they understood was not empty, but filled with meaning. Earth had spoken, and now the galaxy would never be loud again.